And now I do, yes. Knowledge is power. Now I know where the switch is. For the fan.
Hey, Jamie.
Hello.
I'm gonna shake things up.
Excellent.
Why don't we go ahead and get started, because there's a lot of
Sit over here.
information to cover, and expect that everyone else will be joining us shortly, but
Maybe John won't be late then.
thank you for both being here today. I want to make sure we have enough time for you to do your presentation on a number of topics, and that colleagues have about 15-20 minutes at least for questions, if not more time, so I might give you a heads up if we start to get close to that. But why don't you go ahead?
Okay, wanted to go over a few things that some of them are reviewing past information that are a factor in the upcoming budget. Some of the factors that will go into the upcoming budget. The handout I passed out is a graph we keep in the finance department, and it's simply the cash fund, the cash balances at the end of every month, and it goes back for several years, as you can see. And there's a few things that are important to this fund balance information. And one of them is that in the upcoming budget, we'll have an extra pay period, which for the tax funds is about $4,275,000. And the good news is that that one-time cost can be paid for with one-time fund balances that we have here. And I'll explain to you a little bit why that is. We have several bars on this chart, one for each year for that particular month. And the right-hand bar is the latest year. As you go across the page from left to right, and from each bar left to right, you can see that the balances have been increasing for several years. And that's good news, because that's the reason we can spend $4.275 million and not have to have other revenue to cover that one-time pay period. But there's also some information up in those numbers there that I'd like to share with you as well. If you look at any year, any column, you'll see that the low point of the cash flow for the year is in the month of March. And so we have to allocate our fund balances in a way that our fund balance remains positive even through the lowest month of the year. So when we if you'll take a look at March of 15-16, our most recent year, and next year that'll presumably be down several $1 million because we're able to cover that one-time pay period. So that is an end of the month balance, and then that's not the low point of the month either. Before we get our sales tax and property tax in around the middle of the month, that balance can be significantly lower than that. So that's how we take a look at our cash flow for the purposes of making sure that we're in a proper spot with that. Now, once again, this is cash only. This does not take into account receivables or payables to the general fund. We do that at the end of the fiscal year with our audited statements. So one thing that you'll see with the next budget is that it appears that any department's budget is likely to be up a significant amount, and it's because they're one extra pay period. And that's just a mathematical function of paying 27 versus 26 pay periods. Next, for the second year of the biennium, you're probably going to see very minimal budget increases for the same reason. You go from 27 pay periods to 26. So we've seen that the other two times we've had the 27 pay period that I've been in this job. And you'll certainly see it again this year. But the good news is that the city's financial position is very strong in the general fund. This is part of our bond rating, it's part of our budget, it's a very critical thing. So that was one thing I wanted to point out. And if you go to the second page,
Those loan balances, is that pure cash pay or some of that intra-department loans that might have a maturity on them?
this is pure cash. Pure
Are
cash.
there amounts in addition to that we loan from the general fund to other areas?
Yes, yeah, that's carried as an investment.
How much would that be?
It's, I'm trying to think, probably $3 or $4 million total. It's carried as an investment on the balance sheet.
So if we didn't do those, then we'd have that much extra.
Well, yeah, but you also have all the payables and so on that are not accounted for as well. So you'd have some investments, you'd have other receivables, but you'd also have payables and accrued liabilities and so on. But as a general rule, you can look at this, and this is fairly reflective of the financial position of the general fund. Moving on to the the second page there, the legal sheet that is horizontal. You've heard about the revenue shortage that we have with Cablevision franchise fees and occupation taxes. And just wanted to give you some detail on this if you're interested. The 6 companies here represent 80% of that revenue source. And what we budgeted for the 15-16 year was $11.4 million. But if you look at any of these companies, you'll see that the actual receipts are dropping. And they're dropping probably for a number of reasons, but the notes over there to the side explain what we're looking at. In doing all our revenue estimates, we look at what we've budgeted in the past, what we've taken in the past, what our monthly trend is, what direction we're going. And those notes over there explain a lot of this. For example, I'm looking at one that says over the last 21 payments, monthly deposits have decreased more than $1,000 per month. So that's pretty much the trend with all these. So it's a pretty obvious trend that we're seeing here. Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm really perplexed about what is causing that, because I can't imagine that we have telecommunications companies that are doing less and less business. Is that what's really going on?
Well,
I mean, because everybody I see's got something in their hand.
And you know, from people I've talked to, including this guy right here, everybody's getting bundled services that are cheaper. They're finding
Okay.
alternatives. Younger
So-
generation is streaming programs and not buying
Okay.
cable TV service.
So cable TV usage is down, and people are being competitive with their pricing, and consumers are being smarter with what they buy.
Yeah, competitive pricing is definitely a factor. I think when I saw an article on the business page recently about our new fiber provider here in Lincoln, how the
Mhm.
demand is much greater. And I think it's probably for a couple reasons, prices being one of them. So, anyway, there's not really a whole lot of detail or need to go through every one of these numbers, but I guess I want to assure you that we've taken a look at this closely, and we're making a revenue adjustment based on the trends that we're seeing. And trends are pretty obvious here. So, that again is 80% of the revenue.
Allocated, don't say occupation tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
Steve, why did we budget for a higher amount of revenue than we actually received in 14-15?
Well, because, you know, remember that when we did the biennial budget, we were looking at this in the spring of 2014.
Okay.
And for many, many years, occupation tax has been one of the revenue sources that have been more than keeping up with inflation as people adopted more and more technology. But now I think it's adopted, and people are looking for cheaper alternatives. Of course, it's a percentage of gross receipts, so.
But the trend line's been fairly down. I mean, it's trending down from 12 million in 12-13 and to 10.8 in 15-16. And that's a pretty sharp decline. Is there any mechanism for us to update those estimates in the biennial budget in the second year as we see things, or is that not something that we do?
If it's substantial enough, you certainly could. I mean,
Okay.
you'd have to either make a budget cut or increase some other revenue to adjust for that. And that's, I guess, if there's a disadvantage to the biennial budget process, it's that there's a lag of time there, and you can come up short on revenues. On the other hand, we've had other revenues do well, and as you can see from the prior chart, the balance is going up. So we always have revenues that are below and some better. So there's obviously been more offsetting to the good than there has been negative. So just wanted to bring you up to date on that particular item. We'll probably have an estimate for sales tax that this last biennium we used 4.5% of an increase each of the 2 years. We're probably going to back that off to about 4%. So that's, again, a little bit reflective of the fact that we've been lagging a little bit behind each of these last 2 years. So it's something you'll see.
What has been the growth in the sales tax?
It's been roughly 4% or a little greater, but the growth that we're seeing this year is over a base that was a little bit less than we expected from the prior year. So it's not a a big problem, but it's something we need to adjust for. And the property tax, last year we benefited greatly from the fact that we had a revaluation of property in the second year. Won't have that this year. They do it every 3 years. These next 2 years, it's not going to take place. So we're looking at a valuation change of about 1.8% as we go into
Is
this
it because
next
of annexations?
Yeah, there's annexations, construction around town.
Okay.
One thing I forgot to mention on sales tax is due to the misfortune of people having hail damage and so on, we're likely to see in the next couple months somewhat of a boost in our monthly receipts because I suspect they're selling a lot of shingles and windows, siding and those types of things. So that's a temporary boost, I would say, if that happens. And I'd like to just cover one other thing you'll see as we move forward here. During this current biennium, we've added 18 positions to the city budget. I'd like to cover what those are. One of them is an HVAC inspector in building and safety. That's to respond to the demand for service that they have and timely inspections. We added 4 employees for the broadband fund. That's for locates and services required for that initiative. StarTran Innovation Campus Service, that was 5 FTEs. That was added a year ago, or no, 2 years ago actually. And that's fully paid for by the university. We added a sidewalk crew, 4 FTEs. That was a shifting of money budgeted for sidewalks, so covered that. Parks and Rec accountant, that was a result of some of the issues we had out at the golf courses, primarily. But they do not, that's a significant size department that did not have a professional level accounting position, so that was added. Then we have 2 police officers that were added with grants, plus a paraprofessional for a gang liaison. So that's a total of 18 FTEs that were added during this current biennium and will be reflected for the first time in the new budget.
Which one of those, or which of those are general fund?
It'd be Parks and Rec accountant. The police officers and liaison, those are added with grant funds. So as I look at it here, I think it's just the Parks and Rec accountant.
Okay.
Steve, I got 17.
Well, maybe I added wrong there.
Or maybe I didn't write them all
9,
down.
13, 14.
No, I had
I got
18.
17 too, John.
I've got
Can you read
18.
the list here real quick and we'll.
I got 4 broadband, 5 Star
One
Tran.
HVAC inspector.
Is the first one.
Yeah, I got that.
Sidewalk crew is 4.
Yeah.
Parks was 1 plus 3 for police.
Oh, I had 2 for police. Excuse
2
me.
police and 1 paraprofessional.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That was it.
I thought it was 4 police that 1 was grant and 3 were not grant.
We also have the 2 that were added with 3 appropriations
Mhm.
last time that were in the budget,
The
but weren't
positions.
funded with ongoing
Yeah.
revenue.
But that wasn't an addition of FTEs?
It was at the time, yeah, but it was in the 14-16 budget.
Ah,
These are positions that'll show up for the first time in the 16-18 budget.
Now, the police, aren't they like 60 or 70% funded? It's not 100%, is it, on those grants?
Yeah, there's a formula for that, but
So, I mean, it is some general fund.
oh yeah, a little bit.
Did we add a traffic engineer?
Or what?
Didn't we add a traffic engineer?
No.
Okay.
Well, when you say that, what do you mean? Because we're only talking about those positions that were added after the initial 14-16 budget. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and we may have added something when we did the 14-16 budget.
We utilized an existing vacancy to reclass positions.
But they came with a salary increase, I'm assuming, because you're bumping somebody up.
I can look into
Okay.
So, Steve, these 18 were not in the biennial budget. These were after.
Yes.
So we don't know how many we added in the budget at this point.
We're not ready to talk about that yet.
No, 2 years ago, though.
Oh, We added 10, I think, last year, in the budget, and then these 18 in the ensuing 2 years.
We've added 28 positions.
Yes. Since the start of 14.
I think it's worth pointing out that some of these positions, either, as we talked about, were not general fund or came paid for. For instance, the Star Trek operators were paid for by the University of Nebraska.
Yeah, no, we talked about numbers of positions.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure we understood the money.
I think that's a good distinction, though. I mean, because our shortfall's in the general fund.
Fine.
If you're paying for it with a revolving fund or a cash fund, you know, I think that's a separate item. It's general fund is where we're looking.
All right. You want to hand these out?
Yeah,
I'll do that.
okay. I had wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you a little bit about types of decisions and information that we're taking in and discussing as we put together the 2016-18 budget. What you're being handed now is some information that I think kind of sets the stage for how we look at the problem. I asked Steve to do some work on the various numbers here to talk about, look, what is available to us to look at for potential cuts, and what items are more difficult for us to envision, or if not downright impossible to envision as a cut. You'll see here that we start from the premise of the tax-funded budget of about $173 million. Now, everyone remembers that the general fund budget is different than the tax fund budget. There's the general fund, but what that doesn't include is the levy for the library, the police fire pension, or bond and interest redemption, Social Security, unemployment comp. Anything else I'm leaving out there?
No, that's it.
Okay, so that's all those funds combined. Everyone with me so far?
No,
Okay.
What you got the tax funded bond or budget, but what you just took out was what now?
Okay, I want to make sure we all were to operate on the same, the tax-funded budgets. You have the general fund, okay, but that's not all of it. The additional funds are the library fund, the police and fire pension, the bond and interest redemption, Social Security, and unemployment comp. Okay, those items with the general fund make up the tax-funded budget.
So what's that make it go from? That's within the 173?
Yes, all those things I just described are the 173 million. Okay? All right. Well, the question became, all right, what can we actually explore in terms of cuts? Obviously, the bond fund, which is put together to pay the debt service on general obligation bonds, is a commitment that we have. That's 6.2. You take off the running total of 173, and it becomes 167. Looking at the next one, we have to pay Social Security at that 2.7 million. Now, obviously, we can cut Social Security proportionally if we take out employees, so that number certainly can go down, but it is an obligation that we can't take broad cuts from. Okay. Same thing goes the police fire pension. That isn't the same analogy, but we're all aware of the police fire pension. I'm sure Trent and John and company can talk ad nauseum about what that 6.4 represents. That's a negotiated item.
Didn't we put in 7 million?
This is the budgeted amount. The additional money was from the 10% of property tax that we can't budget.
Okay.
Okay. Now, here's the first one. It's a value judgment. Yeah, you can take cuts out of this. You can take cuts out of public safety. But typically how the council, the public, and the mayor's office has operated in the past, we've either chosen not to take any cuts out of public safety or very minimal cuts out of public safety. You can see to the right the various budgets that we're counting as public safety. I think everyone's probably familiar with police, fire, and 911. People are probably aware that the bridge provides detoxification services to the people that we take there for a contract. I think it's worth about $360,000 a year. You have some fire prevention activities, and then of course law and prosecution. That part of the office falls into what we call public safety. One of the dilemmas that we'll talk about more in a minute that we face is how do you, and if you do want to take cuts out of public safety, how do you do it without taking uniformed personnel? Okay? Because one of the challenges has been in previous budgets, going back to when we first came in office, we have removed civilian people out of public safety. Okay? I think there was a language interpreter position we got rid of at one point. We've certainly reduced the number of PSOs, things of that nature. So this year when we talked about public safety to the departments that were involved, we said to them, look, can you try to scare up some cuts as you're talking about this that don't include uniformed personnel? Well, at the target levels we set, that proved to be a little bit of an impossibility, because literally some of the things they were offering you were things we simply could not cut, evidence processing, things of that nature. So that has been a little bit of a dilemma about how to treat public safety budgets. You see that there's an election expense in the budget that we put in the general expense. I think that's in the neighborhood of a couple $100,000.
100,000 for this year, but
Okay.
greater in the next year.
Okay. Obviously, another great hunk is employee expenses, wage benefits, which you can certainly take out of the budget as you take employees. You can reduce the amount, but again, to reduce the benefits, obviously that's union negotiated. That includes our health insurance benefits. It includes all the pensions outside the police fire pension, health benefits, police, and
Dental,
I'm leaving something out.
PEP.
PEP, that was the other one. Okay, post-employment health insurance that we give as part of that, and of course the retirements outside the pension. Okay, we pay rent to the building commission. If we do close a program or move people out, we can certainly reduce that in some fashion, but we can't ignore it. The streetlight budget, I think everyone's aware of. This is the electricity for the streetlights and the debt service on the cops for streetlights. These are obligations that we have.
How much of that is debt service versus electricity?
I'll find out while Rick continues here.
Then we have debt service on other cops itself, okay, of about almost $3 million. There's two we have question marks besides, because it would take a lot of extra time to try to determine, but utilities, insurance, these are just a few $100,000 anyway that don't really affect the outcome. But if you're paying attention to the running total, that leaves us with about $58 million if we hold public safety harmless, from which to cut about $3.5 million. So, what do we do to try to solve that dilemma? I handed this out last week, but I didn't know if everyone would bring it, but it is kind of a demonstration of the things that we look at. This is the program prioritization that we put together over the years that was developed with some public input, staff input, and certainly reflects the, do we need another
There's an
one?
extra one over here.
Do we need another one?
Or not. It's okay.
No, it's- Okay.
Thank you.
The list you have is in priority order. The public picked the prioritization of the outcomes under which each of these programs fall. Staff worked on establishing the goals and associating programs with them. So when you look at a number like at the very end that has 362, it meant there's a tiering effect here too. So programs that are the most important to achieving the job are 1. Programs that are not as important to achieving our goals are listed as 3. So the lower your overall number, the higher the priority, okay? And so these have been put in that order. Now, just to give you an idea of where we're at on this and how it relates to that 3.5 million, if you start at the very back page, page 16, and then you flip to page 13, record 168 is about where $3.5 million in cuts fall. Okay?
What page, Rick?
Page 13, record 168 is about where 3.5 million in cuts falls. It would include at least part of the library hours on Saturday.
13 to 16.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So you're going backwards. Everything below line 168 has to go away if you're taking completely vertical cuts as they're laid out here. Obviously, that's not the only option that you have. But it is something that we instruct with our budget instructions to the staff to take a look at. When we ask them for suggestions, we have them take a look at the program prioritization and ask them to do that. So that is one method we have of kind of taking a look at how that goes. Now let me also show you what that looks like. Let's start these around. In a couple of budget scenarios, if we hold we make a couple of assumptions here. Using that program prioritization, I tried to give you an idea of a couple of scenarios as I'm going to talk really slowly as this makes its way around here, so Trent is left out of the conversation. What you're seeing here is what if we took no cuts out of public safety and just took the cuts on the $58 million that I showed you earlier based on this document, the big one that I handed out to you, okay? So what that means is $58 million, if you're going to get $3.5 million out of it, you're talking about a 6% cut for that $58 million worth of items, okay? That's approximately what it works out to. On line 3 of this document, I did add inflation from the budget of 15-16 to the 16-17 budget. Just kind of an arbitrary figure, the inflation goes up 3%. But then that total figure, I took times the 6% cut to give you an idea of the impact on the bigger general fund users, okay, in the remaining half of the budget that isn't public safety or fixed costs, okay? In parks, you can see there that with 3%, their general fund budget is about 13.7 million. They'd be looking at about $824,000 in cuts. Going to this list, you see in yellow which of those programs would be impacted. You noticed I took neighborhood parks and divided it so that you wouldn't have to see the whole amount. That's part of the amount that would go away if we had to go that route. As you get further up the prioritization, you start to hit things like recreation centers. The community pools are the Star City Shores, the bigger pools that we have in the community. And you can view the rest going up that prioritization to kind of see where we would look for cuts next. I also listed some of the challenges that Parks is facing with more areas to manage. Everyone recalls that their 10-year plan was about 1.7 million short before the additional Keno revenue is factored in. Obviously, we have some Emerald Ash Borer issues, and the Parks Department has suffered quite a few cuts over the years because we have not kept pace with growth. I did similar scenarios for library, aging partners, and StarTran, and the yellow on this demonstrates what you've got to do in order to achieve that target. Now, just these 4 departments comes up with right around, if you apply it this way, we still only come up with about 1.7 million in cuts. Okay, so that's about half the problem. Then the other half has to be if you're holding public safety harmless and if you're holding the fixed costs harmless, you've still got to find 1.7 million in a far more diminished pie because the rest of the departments left really don't have all that much general fund. You can certainly take a look at general expense. That's a significant source of our money as well. But that's kind of what we're facing in this situation. I put it together for you one other way as well, and this would be one thing that's been talked about off and on is across the board cuts. I'm going to make this far faster. Now, if you did it the other way and you said, look, I'm not going to hold public safety harmless for these cuts, they'll be included in this too, and let's do something across the board. Now, using the work that Steve had done on the other piece, there's about 58 million in general fund, tax-funded budget, and fixed costs, okay? But then if you add back in the 66 million from public safety, you come to a number of about 124 million. That's a percentage reduction of about 2.8 for that amount of money if you take the 3.5 out of that. Well, at a 2.8 cut at 66 million is around $1.8 million. And these are the type of things that are impacted if you go that route. Now, I want to make a couple of things clear as we go here, okay? Some of these things are difficult for us to consider because, as I told you earlier, we're trying to do this without cutting uniformed officers, all right, or uniformed firefighting personnel. We're trying to do it with civilians. We don't have that many civilians left. Parking and abandoned vehicle enforcement is one of the areas that we actually have some civilians left. Some PSOs work that program. The rest of the things we're talking about have some element of having a police officer involved, okay? So in reality, the odds are if people wanted to do without non-injury traffic accident reporting, we'd probably forego the service, but we probably would not make the officer cuts. We'd just move them to higher priority duties and absorb what we're giving up into putting it in more hours doing something else, okay, that's higher priority. So that doesn't necessarily give you the type of cut you're looking here. And the problem is, as you go further up the prioritization list, obviously the cuts get a little closer to things that we think of as core services. So that's been a little bit of a challenge on our end as well. I will show you one other thing that I think you all probably want to ask a few questions. We'll leave plenty of time for that. I got a note from John asking to see the survey and a couple of things on that. And forgive the handwritten nature of some of this. I'm not very bright. Once in a while I catch things kind of late. Okay, how does the survey weigh into this, and how did we choose what we were doing for the conversation? Well, we started, I should say, with the program prioritization. Took a look at where that $3.5 million in cuts fell in the entire program prioritization, which was right around that 168th record that I mentioned to you. The sheet I handed out shows you kind of what the thinking went into it and why we did what we did. First off, and I may have explained this the last time we were together, to make the survey work, you can't give people like 60 items to go over. It's just too much, okay? People really cannot handle that, and that advice comes to us from the University of Nebraska Public Policy Center to try to have bigger amounts and fewer items to ask people about. So it's a simulation about what you're doing. So right off the bat, we decided, look, we're only going to include those things that are $100,000 or more so we can have a smaller pool of things from which to discuss. So what I listed for you was, using the program prioritization, all the items that fell into that $100,000 category and that were at the bottom of the list, okay? The ones in yellow are the ones that we actually used. The ones that are not in yellow are the ones we did not use. Now, just to give you a couple of examples, obviously we included the first three at the bottom in the conversation. The next one, line 16, Neighborhood Watch and Business Watch, $110,000. We do try to have a conversation about, look, are we really willing to cut this? Or are we putting out to the community something that we wouldn't touch in a million years? Well, feeling in part because these were uniformed police officers, even if it's a lower priority in public safety, we feel like that program had enough value that we didn't offer it up for cuts. The same kind of goes for the ones you're seeing in lines 11 through 14. For instance, one of the programs is 911 evidence processing. Well, after reviewing and talking about it, not only did we decide we wouldn't cut it, we decided it was too low a priority. We can't function without this, so it really shouldn't be a tier 3 program. And so we have moved it up on line to 212, so it wouldn't be considered that low. Intoxicated persons, protective custody of intoxicated persons. Now, that doesn't really have a huge impact on the crime rate and the things that we want to accomplish. But on the other hand, having drunk people lying around the sidewalks in Lincoln probably isn't something people would accept. So we really don't think it's anything that we would choose to take money out of. We didn't include it in the survey. I think we all remember that when we first did the insert to the newspaper, we had crime victims and witnesses program. We provided some services to them as part of this. But the amount we had was the entire amount of the program. A huge portion of it was grant funded. So in putting out the online version, the version you have in your hand, which went to libraries, we took that out. We didn't think that was a fair comparison. Again, alarm response, kind of the same thing. It cost $170,000 to do, but we charge fees for false alarms. We feel like that is solvable with the revenue that comes in. It didn't make much sense then to cut the program beyond that, because if you need help, an officer needs to go to the program. Moving up there, you saw that there was additional days of library service. We didn't see what good it would do to once again ask for additional days of library service of the public when you've already got one as one of the 8 things you're asking about. So we went up, you see, to the Health Information Referral Call Center and the in-home services for seniors. So those are the one of the 2 programs that fell what I would call above the line of that $3.5 million we discussed earlier. Which should be outside of that. But the reason we went up that high is just what I was telling you, is there were some programs we wouldn't necessarily consider cutting, and there are some practical aspects in putting out the survey. So the survey you see just takes the 8 yellow programs that we talked about, asks to think about them from the perspective of would you be willing to fund them. You're given less money than you actually have for the cost of the programs. And part of the reason we do this is people value things much differently when they actually have to ask and think about it in the context of money. If you just ask people to rate the importance of these things without that question, they universally put, hey, these things are very important to me. But when you make them think a little bit about, look, what if you had to do without that program? What distinctions would you make? So that's what went into that part of the conversation in terms of the taking charge deliberations. So I think I've certainly wasted a good 15 minutes here, and want to make sure you guys have time for your end of it. Questions?
I can answer John's question from earlier over here. The streetlight budget is for the current year, 5.7 million. Debt service is 3.5 million. And electricity is 2.2 million.
That puts it in a bit of perspective too. Rick, in your big sheet here, there'd been a reprioritization over 4 years based upon surveys and so forth. So when you went through these, were you looking at elements that were down in the lower tiers here, and then the lower tiers of the lower tiers, so to speak, or category?
Well, okay, great question. First off, not everything we looked at was in the very bottom of the outcomes, because within each outcome, we rate each program 1, 2, or 3, or you may have noticed some zeros. We added that one year because everyone kept saying, why didn't you cut the program? We'd say, well, it was mandated. So rather than mess with that, we just gave it a 0, which means you just can't cut it. So yeah, some public safety things in that, when you do it that way, fall towards the bottom of the list.
And then I guess I'd like to add, and I'll defer here, you made the comment a moment ago about doing the survey when you attach numbers to it, that it may help get better results rather than people just checking with no dollar figure. As we look at the budget, I guess I would throw out the idea, I know people hate to hear it, but when people have skin in the games, when they pay for something, they tend to value it more. And so in a way, you get people patronizing these things. And if they're going to ride the bus, for example, I mean, we virtually lowered those fees over the years. A lot of reasons for it, but the fare box yields maybe 8% of the true routes. To me, it seems like we can get a better appreciation by people if we do look at, and to help alleviate the stress on the budget, of user fees, of just some adjustments there. And I don't know if that's being considered at all, but there are a lot of these programs that I think that would help us see how well they're utilized. It puts the onus on the users, and then it also helps fund it. And I don't think I'm not talking about drastic things, but I think that's something that needs to be put on the table.
That's a great point. If I can give you an example from the past when this happened. One year the survey came back, and the non-injury accident reporting 2 years in a row finished number 1 as cut it. Even the people who wanted to raise taxes didn't want to pay for it. They said cut it. We offered a budget to cut it. The council put in a fee, just like you're talking about, for collecting that. Unfortunately, the legislature came in and said you couldn't collect the fee, which was sort of ironic in that they download our reports and charge a fee. But the point is well taken, that part of taking charge isn't necessarily saying, okay, we're going to use this to raise taxes. We are kind of testing people's willingness to take different looks and solutions at various problems. And I think when someone's telling you, I would cut that, I wouldn't pay tax dollars for it, but we think it's a service that needs to be retained, user fees are an excellent idea for that option.
I think Chad's back there, the building safety is a good example that it's pretty much a user fee based department now. Thank you.
Trent?
How many of these do you print?
Those, oh gosh, I think we printed 1,000.
Okay. I just was curious at how many you printed. On the program prioritization, are these, like if I'm a police officer or any other position, are these like billing codes or billing funds that as I'm filling out my timesheet I can bill money towards this area or that area, or they were full programs?
No, this I would call, that's a great question. I would call this an overlay.
Okay.
Okay. That programmatically, if, for instance, if council said to me, as one of the conversations, look guys, we're short money this year, we have to take a real hard look at library hours. We'd have to go back in and actually do the work. This is an approximation of the cost of that service. And you can tell it's an approximation. Just to make it easier, we round it to the nearest $5,000. It's above $100,000.
Is this what you've budgeted for previously or is it just, it's just a round number of what you think?
It's what we've, it's based on what's been budgeted previously.
Okay.
Okay, but since we don't know all that's going to be in the programs, when we put it online for 2016-18, it's our approximate cost, usually plus a percentage increase, to give people an idea of where this at. What I don't want to do is make my staff go back through and do the real detailed calculations until we're serious about, look, we want to remove that program.
So we're a little over 3/4 of the way through the year, and we have a shortfall, and I'm looking at some of these dollar amounts and wondering, I'm thinking of, the United Way Fund where they have the thermometer of where are you within the 100% of what you've spent, and wondering if there's some carryover funds from any of these dollar amounts that might be carried over and used towards the next year to whittle that dollar amount away. Because
Okay.
in my experience in government, sometimes you don't necessarily use all your budget, and sometimes you get pretty damn close. So where are those funds that are maybe 60% there when we're already, close to 80% through the fiscal year?
Well, first of all, I don't know of any department that's having a budget overrun, but where we see the result of that is the fact that we run into black.
Sure.
So even if we take in the exact amount of revenue that we projected we take in, departments don't fully spend their budgets, it ends up in the fund balance.
Okay.
And that's a good thing.
Okay.
Certainly better than being the other way around.
So, if, I'm just pitching an idea, but that could be a way of figuring out how to fill some of that hole, so that you're not eliminating full programs, you can fund them completely in the next year.
Well, that is something we do every year, even when we don't have a 27 pay period. We fund part of our programs with fund balances. So that's a way of it coming back to benefit us in a future budget.
Okay, so then another question, because I know this is a negotiated item, how many departments are carrying over fund balances because they're going to pay out sick and vacation leave to employees that have been here for several years?
I think quite a few, actually, especially the small departments. But one of the things we found as we listened to departments this spring is several of them had some significant savings from retirements. On the other hand, they had to pay out those sick leave and vacation balances.
Yes.
But they did that out of last year's reappropriations, and the savings then comes to the next year's budget by paying their replacements less.
Okay.
That has been a significant factor in several departments.
I just think that would be something to look at. I mean, as far as funds that might be left over and the fund balances to take care of some of that for next year. I know that's something when we had a shortfall at the state we did.
And we've never allowed departments to budget for those payouts because they do have access to those reappropriations.
Okay.
So
you pay out. So if I'm gonna pick on Lynn, but a Parks and Rec employee, and I've been there for 20 years, and I have a ton of sick time, I get that balance paid out
that's a portion of that balance.
of your carryover funds.
The carryover funds are part of their total budget, and because they have not only what was budgeted for that year's expense, they have reappropriations from prior years. They can absorb, in most cases, those payouts without having to exceed their budget.
Okay.
You've thrown a lot at us. The amount of the 27th pay period, what is that total?
In tax funds, we calculated $4,275,000, and in addition to the tax funds, which is spread out in a lot of departments, we estimated another $2,155,000.
How much was that second? 2 million, how much?
$2,155,000 for the non-tax funds.
About 6.4.
Yeah.
Okay. And why is that March figure low?
Well, you don't collect property tax until April and May, or April and August. So you go through your budget year 6 or 7 months before you collect the bulk of the property tax. And then all of a sudden you got this big influx of cash, and you can see April and May's balances are much greater than March's.
Questions? Go ahead, John.
Out of curiosity, if we ever considered an anonymous employee suggestion box, maybe we do the taking charge for the citizens, but maybe our own employees could give us some suggestions anonymously on ways we might save. And I know there's
It's a good idea.
challenge there.
Sure. I mean, it's never hurts to look. I would
Mhm.
say to you that employees have some of the ideas we've had on reorganization have come from the employees themselves from time to time, but we haven't really worked on an anonymous system.
Well, we did do that back in the 90s. You'll
Mhm.
appreciate this, John. The first suggestion was for the fire department to take over ambulance service. Literally the first one.
Literally the first one.
Anonymous from
So-
Mike Spade, but we won't say that anyway.
So,
They accomplished that, so.
to further that idea, one idea that I've seen work in other places is not just have a suggestion box, but a process to submit money-saving suggestions. And if those suggestions are adopted and actually produce savings, the employee who introduced it would get 10% of the first year's savings as a bonus.
Listen,
I
I do
mean-
tomorrow. Guy, you and I are gonna have lunch. We're having lunch later here. We're
Yes.
gonna have a budget nerd talk like you
Okay.
won't believe. And I'd love to do that, but I can't imagine A, the union contracts will allow us to do it, and B, I'm not sure how people would react if we were using tax dollars to reward employees like that. I mean,
As long as you're making savings, I think they'd applaud it.
I think if you all are serious about that,
If
we
you
should
say,
talk about that more.
first of all, there has to be real savings, and second of all, you're only given a portion of the first year's savings as a reward. I mean, good behavior should always be rewarded.
The state does have a plan.
Yeah.
It's not that generous.
Okay, well.
You bring up union negotiations or employee as a union negotiations. I think it's something inherent within negotiations. We have got to work with our employee unions. Like health is a big cost, 18,000 for a family coverage, to get more co-pays and stuff in there to make that better cost effective for us. Because 72% or so of our commitments are personnel. And it's tough when you're talking people, but we've got to look at that, and there's some things at the CIR level, and I mean, those are big 30,000, 50,000 foot, but we've got to address them sooner rather than later. We've talked about it during my whole time on the council. But we've got to approach it and work with our employees. Otherwise, there's going to be a citizens' revolt here.
May I briefly respond to that before your next one? Yes, Doug McDaniel, particularly in response to the tax that might be incurred by Obamacare's changes for the following year, the employer tax, the luxury plans, has been working with unions to try to have a plan that isn't quite as rich as the ones now. I think you may have even voted on one. We had one of the unions accept it, but we have not necessarily gotten all of them on board. A point well taken is what I'm getting at.
And then we were talking a moment ago about vacation, sick pay, accrued, and so forth. You've talked about how the departments, one way or another, try to budget so they have money when there's a retirement or something. I would like to see an accurate budget. If they anticipate that they're going to have 3 employees retiring in the next 3 years, and they're going to have this, that they itemize that, and so we know exactly what it is, rather than saying, well, we're going to kind of take it from this budgeted item. Just rather have an accurate budget in that way, and just say, this what that's for, it's not touchable.
Fire and Rescue has done that in the past. They've submitted that as a budget request, and we haven't funded it. Just like we haven't funded it in other departments and made them cover it out of reappropriations. But they have the advantage of the drop program where they know exactly when somebody has to retire. The civilian positions are, people say, well, that person's getting kind of old, but you really can't go around and ask people, it's about time you go.
Well, we know at some time they will, so even if they don't retire for 5 years, typically they might do it in 2 years, we ought to fund it and just have it there. It's
So
just responsible.
okay, so even if the employee wasn't retiring right away, you'd kind of keep a fund in place for that particular purpose?
We do an assumed amount that they're
Okay.
going to. It's not we're trying to force anybody out. And that leads to my other thing. We talk about replacement at lower levels. Have we ever really done an analysis that, Steve leaves, so we're going to pay the next person half that, and then how soon does it creep up to what his salary is now? Not to pick on you, but I mean the idea, we say we get savings. I would like to see at some point a numerical study to say how much is that really, or does it in some cases, are we paying more to replace somebody, or is he getting up there very quickly?
I don't think that's the case, especially from the ones I've seen this year. In fact, in the health department, they've looked consistently to see if they can fill the position at a lower level job. So in that case, that position will never get up to the level the old position was at.
Well, those are good things to know, but I
And
just say.
There's some incentive in
citywide.
our process to do that, John. When we tell them they have to come in at 95% to pick a number out of the air, certainly a good director is going to take a look and say, okay, I got an employee who's retiring that makes 100. I think I can replace it 50, and that's $50,000 that I don't have to give up. Or if I am giving up, it's not cutting anything.
Can I just say that this has been incredibly productive? I mean, I really
Thanks.
appreciate this information. This is more than what I was expecting. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to do this.
Ditto.
Well, thank you. It's actually
Yep.
been a very positive discussion on our end, too. Thank you. And if we want to continue that, please give us a call. We'd love to sit down with you and chat a little more.
Well, where do we go
do that.
from here? I know, Cindy, you had your question too on what the directors asked for. Is that something we're gonna get any access to before
Yes,
July?
as I said, we would certainly release that when we release the budget. We just don't want to release pieces of the budget without having the greater context in place. We believe that leads to confusion about what's actually in, what's actually out. Furthermore, we're not real excited about specific positions being talked about for 6 months because it could mean people are losing their jobs.
But those are asks and so forth. I mean, if we can't
But
discuss.
John,
it-
that's my point. I mean, I'd like to actually propose them as part of our budget before we start talking about them publicly. I prefer not to talk about them publicly before we've even proposed it.
I guess I'd err on the side with Cindy. I'd like to see that now. Just have an
Okay.
idea and understand what the thinking process is from the directors and, you know.
And we've instructed them to bring that as part of the discussion when we do budget hearings, and we will try to provide as much of this to you as we can in advance.
But we're not gonna get it before July 11th.
We're not going to get it before we're done with our budget.
You just mentioned instructions, and I'm curious if you could at least outline the instructions that you give to directors so that we can get a sense of how you deal with the issue of current operations having an increase in cost. So how they do more with less, how they bring their priorities forward. Can you at least outline that procedure for us?
I can do that to a degree here. We have, of course, 2 years to budget for. One had the 27th pay period. I think what we gave them was come in at 99% of the 15-16 budget. And for the second year, come in at 96.5% of the 15-16 budget because you don't have the 27th pay period in the second year. We give them incentive to propose new revenues. They can offset those reductions by proposing realistic new revenues. So they have an incentive to do that. As Rick mentioned, we had some special instructions for public safety, which frankly didn't work out the greatest because of the nature of their work and the types of things when we told them they can't come in cutting uniformed personnel. They had a very limited place to go to find the rest of those cuts. So that was something new we tried. Frankly, didn't work out as well as we would have liked. But I think we realized, too, the difficulty they had in proposing those cuts.
Toward that end, it's important to understand when we said 99%, and Steve said something very key, 99% of 15-16 for that first year, that's not 99% to them. It's more like 93 or 94% when you take out the 27th pay period. Okay, so there, we were actually asking for some fairly deep provisions.
It really wasn't that low.
It wasn't that low?
Probably
Okay.
2 or 3% less than 99%.
Forgive me, I was actually doing that for Nancy's benefit anyway, so go with what he said. And from year to year, we've tried different things. One year we asked them all to come up with a reorganization plan of their choosing, so we could kind of see what it might look like. Steve has talked about special instructions that we gave to public safety. From time to time, we talk to them about various pieces like that to try to drive some new thinking in the departments. They're usually pretty good about it themselves. You have a group of directors that really is pretty innovative and really is relentlessly looking at their budgets for how they can improve them and how they can do more with less because it benefits them at the end of the day.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks for everything. Yeah,
Let's just take a few minutes and reconvene with the directors.
I'm right back.